would like to have a discussion, but please keep in mind not to speak more than 5 minutes in order to allow others to um, reply or give their thoughts and have a more consistent dialogue. So as I've mentioned, this is the agenda that I have this week with all the working groups. We already had an early morning session about the carbon dioxide, and today, this afternoon, we have the second session. Basically, what we did was to put in an Excel file all of the available regulations and guidelines around different levels of carbon dioxide from different countries, also green building certificates and some information that we could find from the researchers out there. And as you can see, the majority of those standards out there, they agree on the 1000 parts per million and 800 parts per million. And in some cases, some of the green building certificates, they have even stricter limits, specifically when they want to accreditate buildings under high performance, like Reset. Fitwel has something similar, but for some reason, their viral response limit is at around 1000 parts per million. But again, in the majority of those places, you will see that 800 and 1000 is the predominant number around concentrations of CO2. In the questionnaire that I've sent a month ago, I asked the members how they feel about adopting in the ultimate version what Professor Maroska and her team suggested with a threshold of 800 parts per million. And basically, this is a response number where people have to act once these levels are breached by ventilating more the rooms or even leaving the room, depending the health, how healthy is the occupant of the building, basically. The majority of the people agreed. However, there were 3 comments, if I remember well, that they suggested having even more stricter limits. And then for the starter tier, which let's say it's the more relaxed, that allows people to introduce themselves in the indoor air quality, we are proposing 1000 parts per million. I wrote South Korea because it was the latest updated standard from the other countries. So maybe some of the other countries that I've shared earlier also propose 1000 parts per million, but maybe they recommend these numbers in earlier years. And again, the majority agree, but again, some individuals, some members of co-workers believe that we should change those numbers. And after today's morning session, we conclude that maybe it makes sense to have even stricter levels for the ultimate and adapting the 800 parts per million for the starter. And I would like to hear any comments from your side as well, if you have. Those were some of the comments people shared during the voting period. Mainly, they say that they believe in stricter limits for carbon dioxide. Then they discuss about the ASHRAE 241 limits and how they communicate those different ventilation exchanges in the different environments that they have. And we also had a comment in Spanish. I don't think maybe he is or he's not connected. So basically what the person from Spain said here is that in Spain we use a different approach for limits of carbon dioxide in indoor spaces by taking the outdoor levels and then adding a specific number next to them depending the type of the environment that we would like to control. And they have a variation of those levels, something that they call IDA 1, 2, and 3. And they have a number that you add depending on how strict or not you want the indoor environment to be in those levels. And I think I updated also a document that I've shared, a spreadsheet during the voting with the rest of the people here at GoQS. Something else that came to my attention lately was a position document by ASHRAE regarding indoor air quality and indoor carbon dioxide levels. So basically what's happening is that there is a division of the scientific community out there. Some people say that carbon dioxide affect the cognitive functions of the human brain, and some others believe that this is not the case, and we should use carbon dioxide as a tool for airborne disease risk and nothing else. And basically, ASHRAE also thinks the same thing. So they focus heavily on using carbon dioxide levels for this kind of assessment. I don't know if someone has any comments on that area, if you believe otherwise or not. And from our side, once I had the chance to speak with the members about carbon dioxide initially, they always asked me, how are we going to implement carbon dioxide as a tool for remediation of airborne diseases, or are we going to consider it as a pollutant that affects human health by decreasing cognitive functions? Jose, please. Someone raised his hand. Um, Feel free to speak. I don't know if your microphone is muted, and no, make sure. No. Okay. And basically, unless someone wants to add something, as I've mentioned, this is a short working group to go through a little bit of the numbers that we're proposing and what the rest of you guys believe about adapting in the ultimate tier, the 800 parts per million, and the starter, the 1000 parts per million for carbon dioxide. And also, I would like to hear your opinion regarding if you believe carbon dioxide can affect cognitive decline or not. I'm divided as well, based on the scientific research that I have read. I think more research is needed. Ciro?
Just my opinion about the cognitivity or if it's impaired the cognitivity. Maybe at very high levels, but surely not at the levels around 1000 ppm.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something that can affect cognitivity. So probably the studies are referring to higher level of CO2, like for example 2000, 3000, 4000. That are sometimes common. For example, in schools, it's not so rare that you can reach 2000, 3000 ppm of level. So in this case, it makes sense to start thinking about the not the cognitivity function itself, but tiredness can bring to momentary decline of cognitivity functions and affecting the overall behavior of pupils and so on. This is the case, but really far from the 1000 that we are talking about right now.
In a study that I conducted in 2020 in schools, I placed it carbon dioxide sensors, and depending always the ventilation systems that they have in place, here in Spain and the schools that I had the sensor inside, they relied on natural ventilation, and it was like winter spring period. I found that those 2000 limits were easily surpassed in some classes, especially when the number of the pupils was high, like above 25 students, the concentrations could reach easily 2000 parts per million. But again, it depends where you live, the conditions, and how dense are the classes.
Yeah, for example, in Italy, there is no ventilation. It's just natural ventilation by opening the windows. And we have something like 10 or 15 schools monitored since 2 years. And in the winter period or in the summer period, the levels are reaching, mostly in the winter period, are reaching something above 2,000, like 3,000 also some days, with a lot of peaks and reducing by opening the windows, but very high level in general. I
Yeah.
confirm this one.
And something that I've noticed from the data that I collected was that it also depends the age of the pupils. Adolescents tend to exhale more CO2 for some reason. Maybe their metabolic rates are higher than kids of first grade and so on. Okay. So
And one additional comment about in residential application, if you are living and you have the sensors in a place where there is the kitchen and you are burning, the CO2 level normally rises high level as well. Momentary, they don't keep a lot of time, but if you don't have ventilation, you can stay even a couple of hours, 2-3 hours with the limits above 1,500, for example, between 1,500 and 2,000, just because you are burning on the fire. Something.
Yeah.
You're cooking.
Absolutely, absolutely. And depending now if you're using wood stoves, the CO2 levels are way higher. And also if you're using gas stoves rather than electric stoves, right?
Yes.
And again, it is, from my experience again, I have found that depending also how good your ventilation system and extraction works in the kitchen, and whether you have those means in place and they are able to remove the production of all of those products during the cooking process. Okay, I don't see any other comments. Let me check the comments. Yorgo, please.
Yes, just a brief comment. I agree with Kiro. I mean, okay, it's not. I don't think also that we should consider it as a pollutant in our applications. I mean, and well, okay, I find very interesting the connection of CO2 with ventilation. So I think it's a good indirect quantity or index. I mean, the level of CO2. But we should always have in mind that what we actually need to quantify is the ventilation level. I think at the end. For me, it's very interesting the fact that we can have some limit, and given the limit of CO2 and the density of people and their activity, we can quantify the required, for example, ventilation level, the required changes per hour. This is important, so that we have in mind that CO2 can be correlated. Because sometimes we say, okay, 2 changes per hour and that's it. No, we have to think what we want to design, what we want to have. But when we go to the actual measurement, it's a good index. I mean, if you have, for example, 800, you feel a little bit relaxed, a little bit, okay. Unless, I don't know, unless maybe we think that we have a substantial source of CO2 that which is something else. So I think these limits are good. And for me, the most important here is not the limits that much, the issue of the limits, but how we correlate them, we interpret these limits, and we try to correlate them with the important quantities or like ventilation rate, for example, and then we go to energy, etc. But I think this is very important.
That's one of the reasons also we created a working group for ventilation here at
Yes, yes, I know. We
GoQS.
have on Friday there is a meeting also.
Yeah,
So,
and
yes.
although I don't think GoQS is going to suggest numbers around ventilation, we wanted to see what it is used around the globe regarding what
Yes.
standards they follow and so on. And
Yes.
you're right, when it comes to following those guides about how many air exchange do you have per hour, it always depends on the occupants of the building, right? Like
Yes.
how many people do you have inside there?
Yes.
And
And
CO2
then
can
you
help.
have to calculate to see what's the limit of CO2 you want to have with your ventilation system, and then you calculate the changes per hour, for example, air change, something that for me and for my students, I think this is a useful knowledge. This connection is very useful. Perhaps not the absolute value, but the connection, so that they know which value of CO2 they would end up if they do this design, for example, or something like that.
Yes, and also at the end of the day, and I say the same thing like you say, it's not about the exact number. At the end of the day, instruments, they will never give you an absolute number. And also it depends if you have like here or there. The instrument's going to measure something different. So, but it's there as a tool to help people understand what they have to do regarding the air quality, right? Like how to protect themselves. In this morning session, one of the members that was involved and is involved in GoQS, she's responsible also for another nonprofit which is called the Safer Air Project. And basically, they work towards more inclusive environments where people, even with severe health problems and immune deprivations, that they cannot allow them to be in places where even the flu can kill them, they fight for more strict regulations and standards around air quality. And I would like to hear from you guys. What do you think? Should we adapt even stricter numbers for the ultimate and potentially for the starter tier? Are those numbers achievable in different buildings based on your experience? Like achieving 800 parts per million is something easy to do, or it requires lots of energy, and then we will have the industry fighting back about those strict numbers that we may propose or not. Does anyone have a comment on that?
I think it's obvious. The stricter you go,
Yeah.
then you would need perhaps an energy recovery. I mean, but then the stricter the CO2 limit for a hospital, perhaps you can go with 600, let's say, for a patient's room, for example. In order, because what you said now, you said about spreading the flu. That's another situation. I mean, which is where you should you have a different demand there. So if you need again indirectly lower CO2, you have to pay for it. I mean, okay, on an energy level, and that means that you have to perhaps to put an energy recovery for the ventilation system, for example. Okay, it depends on the type of building, I think, and what you want to achieve. But because what you say, we mean about hygienic requirements, strictly hygienic requirements, where, of course, you should be determined to pay.
Something else. Lately, I hear a lot about Europe wants to invest in energy and make buildings as sustainable and low energy impact environments. And in most cases, I say the same thing, maybe because I'm from Greece and now I live in Spain, but we have plenty of sun. Why we don't install those solar panels on top of the buildings and have like neutral energy and provide as much air in the buildings without caring about energy consumptions and all of those things. Jose Manuel, I see you have raised your hand.
Hola, Cecilio. Ya sabes que a mí mi inglés no es demasiado allá, así que voy a pedir a José Manuel o a ti que traduzcáis un poquillo, ¿vale?
Okay,
A ver, yo
I'm going
quería...
to translate. Don't worry.
Sorry me, but my English not so good as I would like. So that's why I asked for Sotirios to translate it to English. A ver, quiero comentar una cosa del CO2. Lo primero, el CO2 es un indicador, sí, de que hay una ventilación correcta, pero el que hay una concentración de CO2 no implica necesariamente que estemos exentos de otros contaminantes. Y me explico. Tú puedes tener en una habitación 6 personas o tener una persona. Y tú ventilar en función de la demanda de CO2. Pero los COPs va a haber exactamente los mismos. Si hay una persona como si hay 6. Si tú ventilas solo por CO2,
Mhm.
los COPs van a estar ahí. Y el CO2 con una persona va a ser bastante más baja y la ventilación también. Con lo cual es un error. Esa es una.
So let me translate that. So basically, Jose is sharing with us the
Lino,
fact
Lino,
that.
Lino, Lino. I'm,
Ah,
Lino.
okay, sorry, I just see
I'm
Jose on
Lino,
the screen.
I'm Jose. Well,
So basically, they say with us that just because we may have low concentration of carbon dioxide, it doesn't mean that there is no other presence of any other pollutant like VOCs in the air. And it's also related on the occupancy, like we talked earlier. That's his first point. Por favor, sigue.
También, además de que la concentración de COPs puede variar, también es un poco también cuestionable cuando se dice la concentración o las pruebas que se tienen respecto al CO2, si cuando se han hecho esas pruebas para demostrar que afecta al sueño o a la concentración, si estaba algún patógeno, algún contaminante en adición a ese CO2. Es decir, se le achaca al CO2 muchas veces, pero puede ser que haya otros contaminantes asociados que potencien el efecto del CO2. Pongo un ejemplo. Si yo tengo una calidad de aire con una concentración de CO2 y tengo una calidad de aire mejorada con la misma concentración de CO2, ¿tú crees que la concentración puede afectar? El ARRAE te dice que todavía eso, que faltan pruebas.
Yeah, so basically, Laudelino again is sharing us the fact, the same thing that I've shared with you earlier about the announcement from the ASRE, that CO2 alone is not an indication of cognitive dysfunction in the human brain. And the presence of other parameters, like, for example, a pathogen that may be present in the air, may affect the outcome of the study for the sleep pattern or in general the cognitive functions.
Alguna cosa más quiero comentar, que creo que esta mañana han pedido que explique cómo es la ventilación en España por el tema del CO2.
Sí, porque puse tu comentario aquí. He's asking me about the comment that I placed here on the work.
Vale, pues mira, básicamente en España tenemos 5 metros para ventilar, para calcular en terciario, no en vivienda. Entonces, uno de ellos sí que es por CO2, los otros no. Básicamente el de CO2 te dice unos valores límite interiores que tienes que alcanzar en función del tipo de edificio. Es decir, una guardería o un hospital, la calidad del aire es máxima, que 150 ppm de concentración. Una oficina es calidad media, digamos que 500 ppm de concentración. Y un gimnasio o una tienda, por así decirlo, sería el el IDA3, que sería una concentración de 800. Pero 800 ppm a los que hay que sumar la concentración de CO2 en exterior. Es decir, en un hospital yo tendría, si en el exterior 400, en 750. O una guardería. Todo lo que es sanitario está en esa magnitud. Si es una oficina, pasaríamos a 900 o 950.
Sí,
Si es...
Esto ya se lo he explicado a la gente anteriormente.
vale.
No te preocupes. He's just explaining the comment that he provided to us during the voting. And basically, he's saying the same thing that I've mentioned to you earlier, that on the different environments and the different levels that they have to follow, the IDA 1, 2, and 3, they have the base, which is the ambient CO2 levels, and then they add a limit of CO2 that the different environments have to follow. No estabas aquí del principio de la conversación, ¿no?
No, lo
no,
siento,
ok.
es que no me permitía entrar. Hemos tenido un problema.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments?
No, ya me voy a estar yo todo el rato hablando.
It's okay, don't worry. Any other comments from Kiro?
One thing, Satiris, sorry, I'm Jose. It's Lino, okay.
Okay.
Why did you set the CO2 at 800 ppm? Why that?
So-
No higher or below.
So for the Ottoman tier, we already have in our group Professor Lydia Maroska. She and her team of other 36, if I remember well, scientists, they investigated and they found that 800 parts per million is the right number in order to protect the occupants from airborne diseases.
In all occasions. Every
Always.
In all public buildings, yes. And
And
it's like a threshold.
never mind if a gym or on our hotel is in
Yeah.
No, because we have done trials ourselves, right, with our customers. We found just a few weeks ago, we done a trial in the north of Spain, okay, and the customer had 450 ppms CO2, right? But the VOCs were really high, right? And the
Mhm.
particle matter was high. But that was okay. According to you, 800, I was below 800, so everything was fine. But the people were suffering and they were having headaches, right? And then we had another customer that had above 1,000 ppms of CO2, right? And they said they had headaches. Okay, but then what we did is we measured, and what we found is the VOCs were really, really high, well up about 2,300 ppms. Right, the VOCs. We took away the VOCs, and the CO2 wasn't a problem. The headaches went away and everything. So I don't understand why only 800 when maybe other things should be taken into account, not just CO2 to calculate 800, because possibly there's other problems associated with CO2, not just the CO2.
Well, right now we're talking only about CO2, right? There are other pollutants that we have in our agenda, like formaldehyde, like a more specific one. And we will discuss them later on. But right now it's the number of carbon dioxide and its effect on human health, and more specifically from the aspect of airborne disease transmission. And this is the number they are talking about.
There are laboratory tests that demonstrate that 800 ppm is the right number.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see some raised hands. Kiro?
Yes, regarding the 800, 600 would be much better, but the cost of ventilation between 600 and 800 would be very high. Short numbers, but if you are not using the windows, but if you are using a ventilation to reach 600, will be very energy cost to reach. Of course, good, but much more costly, much more hard to reach. My opinion. At the other side, if you put a too much low number, maybe people would like to reach it, especially in the summer, by opening the windows. And you have the counter effect that you can bring out from outside particulate matter and other pollutants that come from outside. So I think it should be balanced also, because if we make too much strict, the way to reach can be not like the normal ventilation with the filtration. Like to save money, you will introduce in the building air that can contain other pollutants. So I think 800 is a good way to set a limit, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Yorgos, you had your hand raised, but you lowered. Okay. And this, Laudelino and Jose, this is, sorry, Yorgos, go ahead.
Yes. I just wanted to comment that I agree with what Jose said, and also about what Kiro said. I mean, actually, what I wanted to say is that, okay, we cannot, perhaps the scope of such a working group, let's say, would be not to focus, even though it's a CO2 group, then we should not focus on CO2. That's what I'm thinking about. It's like, they have like the diet of ananas, that joke, they say that you eat everything except ananas. I don't know. It's something, okay, I'm just kidding now, but what I want to say that perhaps, as we said, CO2 has to be seen, has to be analyzed with regard to the activity, other sources that we have, many things. So CO2 can be a useful, perhaps it's like, thermal comfort. When we say we have some temperature, which is called, I don't remember now, the standard effective temperature or something like that, which is valid when we have 50% relative humidity, but we don't have 50% relative humidity. So again, 800 can be a very good solution when we have a specific place with specific, perhaps, activities, with none other sources of other pollutants, etc., etc. So perhaps the discussion would be trying to see what affects indoor air quality after all, and how we can define, perhaps like a guideline, what you should have in mind when you define the 800 ppm. If I'm an engineer and I go at a hotel and I say 800 ppm, okay, 800 ppm, but what should I see? Which furniture should I have in mind? Which activity? So that if that doesn't happen, then I have to think perhaps 700. Perhaps, so this could be a guideline relating CO2 values with acceptable, I would not say ventilation because you will tell me to go to say it on Friday, with acceptable indoor air quality. You understand? Something like that, to have a broader, so trying to include, and what Kiro said about, of course, about natural ventilation. What happens there?
Something else that we are talking about ventilation and bringing outdoor air indoors.
Yes.
But in some cases, except of bringing oxygen and diluting CO2 concentrations from the indoor places, we are also, if the location has those pollutants like VOCs, we may bring those inside by increasing the ventilation rates in the indoor space. So we also have to take into account that in some places where people live, near industrial or maybe agriculture places, you may bring other stuff inside that you do not want by the fact that you are increasing the demand of air in the indoor place. So it's always a balance. I also received here a comment on the chat that says, I find it very interesting to compare the threshold used in different countries. Personally, I'm used to measuring CO2 in homes, but I have also been doing it for several years in schools and companies. So I'm regularly confronted with the difficulty of interpreting health risks with carbon dioxide. That comment comes from Bruno Trudal. Ladelino, yes, please. Or Jose, I don't know.
Jose, me this time. What I was saying is, it's an example I'm gonna present, because what happens is in hospitals in Spain, right? They have to be below 800. And we were speaking with a hospital about a couple of weeks ago, and they said that when they were building a building next to the hospital, right? And what they do is they start measuring pollutants and the CO2. They were measuring, I think it's about a month or something like that. They were measuring, right? And they found out that the CO2 was below 800. It was 750, but the pollutants went up, right? Right, they went up, and they also had bacteria, and everything went up, right? And it was all to do with the building next to it. They were building up, all the building work. So I agree with what you say, that sometimes you can introduce more air into a place and you actually contaminate it more instead of discontaminated.
Yeah. We all agree on that, I think.
We have Kalima here.
Yeah, the sand. It says it's the sand that
from the desert.
from the desert.
Right.
It comes up, right? the limits in here go really, really high. The particle matter, you know,
Mhm.
sometimes you can go up to 20,000 or 30,000.
In general, particulate matter is easy to filter. Let's say it's easier to filter than gases. So you can capture all of those particles that they are coming from Sahara
Material.
Desert or maybe from traffic or whatever the case will be. But what's happening with the gas is that it's very difficult or very rare to see gas filtrations in the main HVAC systems in buildings. I'm not
Material.
aware. Yes, please.
I think that you forgot something. Buildings are not a submarine. You
Yeah.
have windows, you have penetration of the earth everywhere,
Mhm.
and when you have outside pollutants, they go in. Even if you use air handling units, you have always problem with that.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that it's another problem. It's not only ventilation. We have problem also with windows and doors. That's not-
Infiltration in general, right?
Yeah.
Like the problem of infiltration. Okay, now let's go back a little bit with carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Any other concerns around the numbers? We would like to start writing those numbers down and communicating those numbers. So it's very important for us to have an agreement of whether you agree or disagree with the proposed numbers that we have. Hiro?
Yeah, numbers, okay, but also to be decided the meaning of CO2, if it's related to cognitive functions, to virus spreading, and so on. This is much more important than numbers, I think, the guidelines itself.
Mhm. Yes, and that's it's going to come alongside, right? Like we are writing paragraphs discussing why we have adopted different numbers and limits, and we will say that basically the reason is airborne disease assessment
Makes sense.
for those specific numbers, because as we discussed, cognitive issues will come above 2,000, 3,000 parts per million. Today, for example, I read a paper that Professor Pavel posted on LinkedIn about masks, surgical masks, and how they may affect cognitive functions. And basically because you have the mask and they trap the majority of the CO2 that you're exhaling. And because of the temperature, there is a mechanism there that may influence the heart rate and consequently influence the decision part of the brain. So they saw a decline, if I remember well, 12% in decision processing, multiplication specifically. Okay. I think that's all for today. I would like to thank everyone for participating and sharing their opinion. I will try to put this information tomorrow and make it public alongside with the particular matter that I didn't have the chance this morning. And you can always debate on the website or emailing me more information, more comments. My mail is always open. So please, thank you for being here, and I hope to see you in the ventilation and filtration as well, working groups. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thanks, Odile.